Hello. Today, I would like to say several words about geopolitics. Generally, this is not my primary topic. At this moment, it is principally important because I would like to talk about how to make medium term forecasts. We're not going to talk about long term ones yet. This would be a completely different area. So far, from my standpoint, in order to draw a more or less realistic geopolitical picture, we need to define a certain base point towards which we will develop our line of logic. For instance, if we look back at the United States logic 6 months ago, around the times when Trump was already elected but did not start his second term yet, and also look at the logic of Great Britain, the European Union, and China, that we will see that all their thinking converged to a base point of increasing containment of Russia as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. In other words, by using the leverage inside Russia, or let's say it openly, the foreign agents, the fifth column, and considering that Russia's economic resources were limited, the goal was to force Russia to publicly admit its own weaknesses, and then push this line further towards its natural conclusion. This was the base point 6 months ago. Whether it was good or bad is a separate conversation, but it was like this. Starting from approximately the end of last year, I realized that the base point would be a collapse of the global financial markets. Consequently, I try to construct the entire geopolitical configuration towards this new point. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Donald Trump changed his approach approximately 1 to 1.5 months after his inauguration, because he also realized that the collapse of the financial markets was practically inevitable. There were some nuances, of course, whether this could happen in the late spring, the early or the middle of summer, or even the early September. Still, Trump understood that he must act before his adversaries figure the situation out, as it was the right moment to make deals, gaining something real from them in exchange for making promises or taking upon future obligations. Like in one Jewish joke, when an old man is dying, but not quite dead yet, so he smells something tasty being made at the kitchen. So he sends his grandson to ask the grandma if she was cooking his favorite fish, and if she would be so kind to give him a small piece. So the grandson goes to the kitchen, asks the grandma, and comes back to the dying old man and says, "Grandma said you may not have it, because this is for the time after." So Trump was also planning on giving something back, but only after the crisis strikes, and the puppy dog, called the global financial system, dies in front of our eyes. The issue is that at the beginning of 2025, all Western politicians had a feeling that the economic growth was about to start. Later on, Trump experienced two moments of insight. First, approximately 1 month after his inauguration, he realized that the economic growth would not happen anytime soon. Second, he suddenly learned that a collapse was going to happen instead of the growth. We could clearly see by how his policies and attitudes changed accordingly. By contrast, the European elites, the Euro-Atlantic part of them, realized that the collapse was inevitable only very recently, literally last week. This produced two unexpected results. First, the American Euro-Atlanticists understood that the entire battle of Euro-Atlanticism had been lost. As a result, they ran to connect with those American elites that stand behind Trump. Next, they reached some sort of agreement, based on which Powell visited Trump's office. This, according to the Administrative Code of Conduct, means Powell accepted Trump's authority, which comes naturally because we all understand that during the times of crisis, it is the executive branch that rules. Second, there were no media leaks. How is it even possible to have no leaks in today's White House? This is very simple, because it is in both sides' best interest to keep this confidential. Because having an understanding of how exactly each side will act during the crisis costs a lot of money. So anyone who allows a leak will later pay for it, billions of dollars. That is why they all are silent, as we say, as silent as communists during interrogation. There are no fools in the United States at this level. Then, consequently, the second part of this agreement is the fact that the judicial line, launched a while ago to limit Trump's authority to impose tariffs, suddenly stopped. Literally, the next day after the Powell's visit, the Federal Appeals Court passed the decision of the lower court, so Trump's tariffs would remain in effect. Sure, it is just a temporary pause on the previous decision to block the tariffs. My hypothesis, however, is that if they truly wanted to block Trump's tariffs, there would be no pause. There are some nuances here. Of course, the appeals court might be simply trying to show its own importance. In short, this is a hypothesis. In the meantime, the European part of the Euro-Atlantic camp started to panic. They suddenly realized that in a month or two, everything is going down the drain. Grab your sacks, run to the station, the train is departing. So what could they do? They intensified their fuss, playing their last running game. Kellogg explained to Zelensky that he must take part in the negotiations. Next, the Russian central bank declared an ultimatum to the entire Russia, saying yes, widespread bankruptcies of businesses are starting, but we're not going to give up our goal to curb the inflation. So that is why we will keep the interest rate high. Let me translate this into the common language. Our real goal is to destroy Russia's industries, and we will continue to do so until all the industries are gone. Consequently, we see a lot of activity among various parts of the Peace Party and the liberal elites in general. I'm not going to talk about this a lot because many people already wrote about this. No need for me to enter this discussion. So this is the picture we see after only one remarkable thing happened. The Euro-Atlantic elites understood that their base point was wrong, but transition to any other point is no longer possible. It is too late. Trump, who understood earlier that the collapse was coming, had time to change his approach. By the way, his deals involving the Middle Eastern money are reflections of this new approach. Because it is very interesting. Whose money did he receive? The Arabic petrodollars? The oil money? Unlikely, because this type of money was already in the form of US Treasury bonds, and those have not been touched. The money for this deal came from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But what if it was not the Arabic money, but for instance, British or Chinese money or Indian money? This is a very interesting question. Yet I'm not going to dig into this. But let me tell you the truth, that behind the Chinese money, there were Chinese liberals. Earlier, the Chinese liberals had made an agreement with the Euro-Atlantic elites that China would act together with the European Union against both Trump and Russia. That was the exact reason Xi Jinping ended up in a difficult position while visiting Moscow on May 9th. He understood that his domestic economic and financial circles demanded that he would act a certain way. Xi Jinping tried to play their game, but we know what happened with Louis da Silva's visit to Moscow. Let me just reiterate. These are hypotheses that explain my logic I've been following since December of last year. Up until now, everything has fit this logic well. That's why I think the financial markets collapse is practically unavoidable. But China today has to come up with a new strategy, because the strategy that the Chinese liberals chose and imposed on Xi, based on which they would quickly defeat Russia, and they makes this new Russia their vassal by offering Russia to save its face and keep its pseudo-sovereignty. This plan failed, as it became evident approximately 1.5 weeks ago after the negotiations in Istanbul. And by the way, now we understand how we won the negotiations in Istanbul. For a simple reason, because we, our political elite, acted based on the logic of inevitable financial collapse. By the way, our elite remained silent and did not disclose anything. In short, if my guess is right, then within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will see a split among the Euro-Atlantic elites. It might have already started if the American part made the deal with those who stand behind Trump, if my logic is correct. Once again, this is a hypothesis. If this is correct, then next we will see a remarkable picture. In Russia, the liberal team will start falling apart. I'm not sure what it will look like in China, but I am sure that Xi will not forgive them or forget. Yet the key question is the strategic line. The Euro-Atlantic elites cannot have any strategic line. They're not prepared for the collapse simply because they ignored the early signs of it. By contrast, for Trump and also for China, the principal question is the strategic line. The most interesting thing that we will see over the next couple of months is how each of them will construct their lines. This is the picture I envision today. Once again, and perhaps the fifth time already. This is my hypothesis, based on my understanding of the economic processes. So please, do not judge me harshly. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.